Samuel Alito smirked in a way that made everyone in the packed studio feel as though he knew something the rest of them didn't. It was the kind of smirk that could ignite anger without a single word being spoken, a curl of the lips that suggested not confidence but condescension. The Today Show had been buzzing for weeks about this rare sit-down interview, advertising it as a unique moment to hear directly from one of the most influential, and controversial, figures on the Supreme Court. Viewers tuned in expecting civility, maybe even charm, but what they got was a lesson in tension, body language, and the raw clash between power and accountability. From the beginning, things were uneasy. The set looked warm and inviting, soft lighting, colorful decor, the trademark friendliness of morning television, but Alito's posture cut through the cheer like a knife. He sat rigid, one leg crossed neatly over the other, hands folded in his lap as if carved from stone. Al Roker, ever the consummate professional, tried to start things light. He asked about Alito's daily routine, about how it felt to carry such responsibility, even joked about whether justices ever argue over coffee the way families do over breakfast. Alito chuckled faintly, but the chuckle didn't touch his eyes. Then the conversation shifted. What had been planned as a balanced discussion about legacy quickly turned into something heavier. Roker, with that disarming smile, began raising questions about the court's credibility, about how the American people were processing recent rulings that had sparked protests coast to coast. Alito's answers were clipped, technical, almost dismissive. He spoke of constitutional duty, of original intent, of decisions that had nothing to do with popularity and everything to do with the law. But it wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. His words were delivered with the faintest upward curl of his lips, a smirk that communicated superiority, as though the very act of questioning him were laughable. The cameras didn't miss it. Neither did the audience in the studio, where whispers began to ripple through the rows. It wasn't a big, obvious grin, it was subtle, practiced, the expression of someone who knew he was untouchable. And in that moment, sitting only a few feet away, was Chaka Khan. The legendary singer had been booked for the second half of the program, there to promote her new tour and celebrate her decades of music that shaped generations. She hadn't planned to weigh in on constitutional law, but the smirk was too much. When Roker asked Alito about public trust in the judiciary, the justice leaned back slightly, smirk widening, and said, "The court isn't here to win popularity contests. People may not like decisions, but that's not my concern." His tone was measured, his words rehearsed, but the air in the room shifted instantly. Chaka Khan's eyes narrowed. She adjusted in her chair, tilting toward him with a presence that was impossible to ignore. The audience caught it, the producers caught it, even Al Roker, mid-question, faltered as he sensed the storm about to break. "You can sit up here and smirk all you want," Chaka began, her voice low but resonant, carrying the weight of both anger and lived experience. The studio went silent, stunned. "But people out there are hurting because of decisions like yours. Real people, women, families, entire communities." Her words sliced through the veneer of morning television politeness, landing like a direct challenge in front of millions of viewers. Alito blinked, his smirk faltering for the briefest moment before returning like armor. He didn't reply immediately, and for a man who built his career on words, that pause was deafening. Al Roker quickly tried to regain control, chuckling nervously and murmuring something about spirited debate, but no one was laughing. Chaka wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her hands gesturing with controlled precision, the same intensity she might bring to a stage performance. "Don't talk about duty like it's some abstract idea. Duty to whom? To the people who have to live with the consequences. To the young girl whose future you've decided without ever knowing her name." Her voice rose, not in anger, but in passion, echoing with the kind of truth that can't be rehearsed. The audience erupted, some clapping, some gasping, others murmuring in disbelief that this confrontation was happening live on national television. Alito's smirk weakened further, but he kept his composure, clasping his hands a little tighter in his lap. Roker shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware the moment was slipping beyond his control. What was supposed to be a carefully choreographed interview had turned into something raw, something uncontainable. And through it all, the smirk remained, though thinner now, more strained. The justice wasn't used to being spoken to like this, certainly not by someone with Chaka Khan's gravitas and boldness. He could dismiss journalists, he could deflect politicians, but here was a woman who had nothing to lose by speaking her truth directly to his face. As the cameras zoomed in, the contrast was undeniable. the robed authority of the court and the unshakable spirit of an artist who had spent her life giving voice to the voiceless. Morning television had never felt so electric, and no one watching could look away. The next segment was supposed to be easy, a warm celebration of Chaka Khan's extraordinary career, a look back at her groundbreaking music, her influence on generations, and the excitement surrounding her new projects. The producers had the clips ready, the lighting set, even the audience primed for a nostalgic sing-along. But none of that mattered anymore. The energy in the room had changed completely. The tension that had sparked during the confrontation with Samuel Alito hadn't dissipated. It had grown, filling the studio with a heaviness that no amount of morning show cheer could cover. Al Roker, ever the steady hand in turbulent moments, did his best to smooth things over. His smile was tight but determined as he segued into the musical portion. Chaka, you've given us so many iconic songs, songs that have defined entire decades. Let's talk about your new tour, what fans can expect. His words sounded rehearsed, like a lifeboat he was tossing into stormy seas. But Chaka wasn't climbing aboard. She offered a polite nod, even hummed a few bars of one of her classics, her voice still velvet rich, but her eyes were fixed elsewhere, on Alito. He sat unmoving, his smirk faint but stubborn, as though daring her to continue the fight. And she did. You want me to sit here and talk about my music like everything's fine, she said, her voice calm but firm, but I can't. Not after that. The audience hushed, sensing that something irreversible was happening. She turned fully toward Alito, her posture regal, her presence commanding the entire studio. You don't get to hide behind robes or titles here. This isn't your courtroom. This is real life, and these are real people you're affecting. The audience clapped, some standing in solidarity. Roker raised his hands slightly, as if trying to settle the room, but Chaka pressed forward, her voice gaining strength. I've spent my career giving voice to people who didn't always have one. To women, to the black community, to the marginalized. And I'm not going to sit next to you and pretend like your decisions are just another topic for morning chit-chat. They're not. They are life and death for people I care about. Alito's smirk cracked again, replaced briefly by a flash of irritation. He shifted in his chair, his hands tightening around the armrests. For a moment, he looked like he might respond, but he stayed silent, perhaps calculating the cost of engaging in a live debate with a cultural icon whose words were already reverberating beyond the studio walls. The producers in the control room were panicking, voices overlapping as they debated whether to cut to commercial. But they couldn't, not with the cameras capturing one of the most gripping moments live television had ever seen. To interrupt now would only inflame the fire. So they let it roll. Chaka inhaled deeply, her composure unshaken. Then, without warning, she stood. The scraping of her chair across the floor echoed like a cymbal crash. Roker reached instinctively toward her, saying, "Chaka, wait, please," but she shook her head, her earrings swaying as she straightened her posture. "I'm not going to sit here and sing for smiles while justice is being mocked," she declared, her words slicing through the room. Her tone wasn't angry, it was resolute, the voice of someone who had decided that silence would be complicity. The audience gasped, then erupted into thunderous applause. Some cheered, some whistled, others rose to their feet. It was no longer just a TV taping, it was a moment of history. Chaka adjusted her outfit, lifted her chin, and began walking toward the edge of the set. Every step was deliberate, her heels striking the floor with finality. Alito's smirk had vanished entirely now, his face pale, tight, unaccustomed to being so publicly stripped of control. Al Roker's voice wavered as he tried to regain composure. "Ladies and gentlemen, Chaka Khan," but the words rang hollow, drowned out by the roars of the audience and the sight of the legendary singer exiting with dignity and defiance. The cameras followed her until she disappeared off stage, leaving behind an empty chair that spoke louder than any song she could have sung. The image of that vacant seat beside Samuel Alito became instantly iconic, a symbol of protest, of refusal, of moral courage. Social media exploded within seconds. Clips of her words, her walkout, her unwavering stare flooded timelines across the country. Chaka vs. Alito trended within minutes, with millions praising her bravery. Meanwhile, in the studio, Alito sat awkwardly in the silence that followed. For once, there was no smirk, no sense of control. He adjusted his tie, glanced at Roker, and muttered something about respectful discourse, but the damage was already done. The smirk that had opened the show had been obliterated by the walkout that closed it. And Al Roker, who had weathered countless live TV storms in his career, knew this was unlike any other. Looking into the camera with a mix of disbelief and professionalism, he closed the segment as best he could. But everyone watching at home knew they had just witnessed something unforgettable. Chaka Khan refusing to be silenced, walking off the Today Show not in anger, but in power.